I don't even understand what the big deal is. I love carrying my Spyderco tip down, but if I end up doing that, then people are going to make fun of me. Next thing you know, I'm going to have to quit YouTube. It's just ridiculous. Oh, hey everyone. Just adjusting some things on my Spyderco. But speaking of Spyderco, that's actually the knife we're going to be customizing today. And more specifically, it's going to be the Subvert. Now, this knife is very famous in a sense of people, or I should say a lot of people, hate the bright orange G10 on this thing. I don't mind it. They actually did a really good job. Nice little micro milling there. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but beautifully done. If you don't like orange, then I guess this isn't the knife for you, but we're going to change that today. And Rex, the customer who sent this in, I just want to give a quick shout out to him. Thank you for sending this in to get it customized. He wanted to add something a lot darker, and I think what he chose is a good choice. And I'm going to show you guys right now what it is. It is the Fat Carbon Dunes. See if I can get that in the light to shift for you guys. Just a beautiful material, and I think it's going to complement the Subvert very, very well. And as you can see, or if you guys have handled this knife, the liners are darkened and stonewashed, so I think that's what's going to complement the Fat Carbon really well. If it was my personal knife, I definitely would etch and stonewash the blade. Same with the pocket clip. But since that's not the case, I think we're going to be okay, and I think it's going to look really good still, since the hardware is a little bit on the brighter side, or satin finish. It'll complement the Fat Carbon when it's kind of doing its shimmery thing, if that makes any sense. But that is what we're going to do today, so let's get right into it. Alright everyone, so I ended up using the CNC to create the pivot hole and the depth and all that stuff. But you can see that the hole isn't all the way through. It's almost breaking through. And sometimes that happens with the CNC. Again, I'm still learning the CNC and trying to perfect it. But it didn't go all the way through. That's why I have the drill press set up here with the drill bit to clean out that hole. And that way I can get the pivot pin, see right here, to go through, which I'm going to use the original scale as a template. That way everything is going to be nicely lined up. But what I'm going to do is, once I clean that hole out, I'm going to put the pivot pin through the original, and then I'm going to go through on top, and then once that's in, I can use it as a template to get the hardware holes. I was going to use the CNC, but it would have just taken too much time, and this is a lot faster. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm sure you guys have seen this quite a few times in my videos, but I figured I'd explain it just a little bit better this way. That you guys can hopefully get a better understanding of what I'm doing. So I got it to the point where the original hardware is holding the bottom end of the scale in place, as you can see right there. And then I have the pivot pin holding up the top section of the scale in place. So it's going to be really nice, since it's nice and solid. It's going to be really nice to drill out the final hole, and then all the holes will be exactly where they need to be for the fit up on the liners. Now keep in mind, I am drilling the hole for the hardware just slightly smaller with this drill bit. I don't know the size of it right now, but every knife is different, so just remember to keep the hole just a little bit smaller. That way it self-threads when you put the hardware screw in there, and it holds it down. And I decided to use the opposite scale to locate the hardware holes, because I can show you real quick. I'm gonna use the other one that I just finished. So if I was to use the scale as my template and go from the top side, you guys will see here in just a second that there's a lot of up and down movement, which would be very bad, because then my hole won't be exactly where it needs to be. So I ended up going from, I'll use this one again, ended up going from underneath. So I'm using the scale that's going to be the new one, and since the fit up for the outer diameter of the pivot pin is really tight and snug, when I go from underneath and I use the original hole, it's really nice and snug, and you can see there's no up and down movement as I'm putting pressure from this screw So when I drill the hole exactly where I want it, it won't move on me. Then I can put the screw, hold it in place, and then finish the last hole there. Again, you just really want it to be tight. If not, then your holes are going to be out of alignment, and that's not going to be a good thing. So just keep that in mind when you are creating scales. And also make sure to use the right side of the new material for what is bottom and what is top. I learned the hard way, unfortunately, where I messed up a few times. So just want to point that out so you guys don't make the same mistake I did. But I'm going to end up finishing the holes on all of these, and then I will bring you to the vise where I'm going to show you how I trace everything and then cut everything out. So I'm about to start cutting off some chunks of the excess material of the fat carbon, and all I did was to trace onto the new material was copy the original. I just used the original hardware to hold this in place, traced it with a pencil, and as you guys can see, I'm going to have these bigger chunks of material to cut out, and I'm going to use my disc grinder, or cut-off wheel, whatever you want to call it, to cut off these chunks. I'm going to put it in my vise to hold it nice and steady, and all I'm going to do is get as close, not as close as I can, but keep a good distance, maybe a 1/16 away from my pencil mark. That way I'm not removing too much material. Always give yourself a little extra material as you're slowly chipping away at the main cutout of the scale. Alright, so as you guys can see, I got it as close as I could with that grinder, or that cutoff wheel, and it's not too bad. As you can see, I kept a nice safe space, or a good amount of material left over, just in case I had to slip up somewhere, but we are good to go. So now I'm going to use the table grinder to get as close as I can to the pencil mark, and I want to make sure not to go over my pencil mark. And one thing I want to mention is use gloves when you're working with carbon fiber or fat carbon, just because your hands will get super itchy, and I highly recommend these gloves. I'll leave a link down below where you guys can pick up some of these, and I also have a fan right there, and then I also have one right there. So I like to just have a lot of wind kind of pushing everything out of the garage door, which is facing to the left of me. And I'm wearing a face mask and glasses just because, well, you don't want to lose your eyes and you want to keep your lungs nice and healthy. So that is one thing I wanted to mention, but let's get right to it. So here it is after I finished on the table grinder. So you can see the rough profile, and then the pencil outline, you can see that I'm slightly touching it, which gives me about a 1/16 gap to where the original outline should be. So again, always good to give yourself a little extra material. That way you have a little cushion for failures or little mistakes, and you can hopefully fix them. That's why I like to do that. But you can see this is going to look really, really good once it's done, and add some contouring to it. But when you're done on the table grinder, you can see that the fat carbon likes to fray. G10 and any other carbon fiber does this. So what I like to do is use 120 grit to clean the edges. That way when I'm working with this, I'm not getting any issues or slivers or any of that itchy material in my skin. So what I'm going to do now is use the router to get the finished outside perimeter of the scales exactly where they need to be, and I'm going to show you guys exactly how I do that. So the next step is going to involve this little rig that I set up with a wood router underneath, and this works really, really well. I'm going to do a video on how to make something like this because it makes life a lot easier to get the shape of the scale exactly the profile that you want, and this saves a lot of time. So I will make a video on how to make this tool here very soon. But as you guys can see, I'm using the original scale as a guide on this bearing before. If you guys know how wood routers work, you can see the bit has the cutting piece underneath the bearing. So that's going to make the bearing ride this top original scale and create that perfect profile for the new scale that I'm creating. And it's going to cut it perfectly. So what I did was I sandwiched. Fortunately, I had an extra set of the Subvert scales that I did from that last one that I customized. And I sandwiched it underneath the new scale and then the original. That way it gives me my gap. If I did not have this other scale, I would have just created a rectangular piece that creates a gap from this hardware to the pivot. That way you get that extra gap, which allows the bearing to use the original scale as a guide, allowing that sharp piece to cut the outer edge of the new one. I hope that makes sense. More than likely I'll do another video describing or explaining how exactly this works. So I'm going to do that really quick and I'll show you guys what it looks like. Alright, so the router part is finished, and as you guys can see, it does a fairly clean cut all the way around. And here I'll show you guys what it looks like. So it's exactly the shape it needs to be, since again this setup works out really well. The only thing I'm going to have to do is, once I get the other one finished, I can put them together and use 320 grit to just go over this to really clean up those little cut lines you can see there. And it doesn't take much, so just a quick 320 over it and it'll look really clean. So I went ahead and contoured the scales, both of them. You can see right there. I basically just copied the originals. Now it's not as thick, which is a lot nicer in hand. Toughest thing was to actually contour it exactly like the originals. You can see this back section in the back here was really difficult, but I figured out a way to contour exactly the way it needed to be. So I did avoid that situation. And another challenge is that it thins down from the back to the front. So it actually goes at an incline or a decline, whichever one it is. So I had to remove material from the front to the back gradually, and then I was able to contour the scales. Basically, I created a tool for myself to actually allow myself to go back and forth and contour the scale without cutting my fingers, because if I was to just do this by hand, my fingers would definitely get destroyed. So all I did was I took some black G10, I located these two holes, I drilled into it, and then I tapped it. G10 is surprisingly good at being tapped, so that is what I did. That's one thing I highly recommend. If you have to make a tool, just grab a scrap piece of pretty much anything and make a tool. So that's basically the motion I did, back and forth, a lot of back and forth checking with the originals. So a lot of fit-ups like this, making sure I had the right thickness, and in the back it's a little bit chunkier. So like I said, just a lot of double checking. This is where patience is key. You really take your time to get that contour. Sometimes on my own personal knives I will contour it a different way, just because that's what I want, but you do have quite a bit of freedom here. So keep that in mind. Now what I'm going to do is go over to the table over here and we're going to hand finish it with some 320. So I decided to leave the scale in the tool that I made, and I'm going to be using it as another tool just to hold the scale in the vise. That way I have more control with the 320 grit sandpaper. And I like to finish fat carbon with the 320 grit. I think it just gives it a better finish. I like this matte finish. And what I'll do is I'll just go over the 80 grit off of the belt sander, and I'll actually use a light to check and see if those deep scratches are gone. And I'll just keep going over it lightly and making sure not to round these edges. So I'll just go off of it instead of on it and around it. And where there is this pivot here, I'll just lightly go in these little sections, and I'll choose a nice a nice straight line to go with. In this case, I'm using the straightness of the bottom section of the scale. So I'll just go as straight as I can with that all the way over, and then I'll use lacquer thinner to clean it up, and then I'll look with the flashlight again just to really make sure all those scratches are gone, because if you don't, they'll really show through and it's not a pretty look. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this one. I already have the show side, or no, the pocket clip side finished. You guys can see it just looks really cool. And when you contour fat carbon or carbon fiber, you expose a lot more cool designs and textures, and it moves a little bit different than before. But that's the way I like to finish it. And next step is going to be doing the backspacer, and we're going to go over to the table and I'll show you how I like to do that as well. So luckily I had 2 pieces off of the original slabs that I created for the scale. I was fortunate enough to get 2 pieces off of the scale slabs, and if I ended up messing up this one, I do have an extra one, so that's always nice. But I lucked out, and this one is just a little bit thicker than the original backspacer, which is what you want since you're going to be kind of flattening it after you drill the holes and do everything. So the way I ended up creating, or I'm going to create this backspacer, is I took the original backspacer, placed it onto the material, making sure to give myself a little extra material at the ends or the tips. And then I took a mechanical pencil. I like to use a mechanical pencil because you can make the lead longer than it needs to be, and then you can reach into those holes and mark what you need. Then what I ended up doing was, after marking the barrel spacer holes, what I did was I chose the first hole, drilled it out, then I took the barrel spacer here, fed it through the original backspacer, put it through that hole I just drilled out, and then as you guys can see, it allows you to pivot. So I put it where I wanted it, and then actually drilled through this hole, and then took the other barrel spacer, fed it through, which locked it into place so it's nice and snug. And then I ended up drilling out the pinhole here that keeps everything steady and keeps it from wobbling, basically. I still have to do the lanyard hole, so I'm going to do that before I start cutting out the material around it. And keep in mind to give yourself a little bit of extra room around that pencil line. It's always good to have a little extra material. But I'm going to go ahead and finish this backspacer completely, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like after. Alright, so I finished the backspacer here, as you guys can see. I wanted to give you guys a close-up of this thing. And it does shimmer at the right angle, so you get to see that really cool carbon fiber grain. You get to see it a lot better here on the top. See if I can get it. There we go. So at a certain angle, it does do its thing. And when I have this assembled, I'll show you guys another really cool thing that happens with this shimmer. There's a slight little bevel there on both sides, matched it as best as I could. Very tiny custom backspacer, but that little detail will go a long way. And I wanted to show you guys something else with the scales here. So with the liner, there are certain sections with bevels and then straight sections. So I wanted to kind of bring that look into the scales. So I took both scales. I did this to both to match nicely. So I beveled underneath where your hands go or your fingers go, because it just felt a little sharp. I did it on the back end here, and then I ended that bevel, the bigger bevel, here in the back by the lanyard hole opening, and then I did it up in the front as well, basically where your fingers are going to spend quite a bit of time, depending on how you're holding the knife. And then everywhere else, I just slightly beveled it. Again, I really wanted to implement that beveled, not beveled section from the liners onto the scales. So really happy with how these turned out, but I'm going to assemble this and we're going to get a close look of what this thing looks like all put together. Alright, so I have it all finished up. Really, really pleased with how everything turned out. I know I always say that, but I mean it. I always do mean it. So I'm going to give you guys a really close look, and I'm going to have to get behind the camera there because unfortunately my phone won't give me a little screen to see what's going on, but here we go. Here's the pocket clip side, and don't worry, at the end of the video I'm going to do a lot better footage for it, but there's the pocket clip side, and I hope I don't drop this knife because that would suck. But there is those really cool dune or black dunes from Fat Carbon. Just a beautiful material. And one thing I wanted to show you guys was when the scales do that little shimmer, it trades off from the back of the scales onto the backspacer. So there's a little bit of a delay, so it transfers over, if you guys can see that. So back of the scales, and then it transfers over to the backspacer, which I think looks really, really good. So it looks like opened up. Yeah, this knife is massive. It's a big knife, but it's beautifully done. I would love to get one of these, but man, they're expensive. Over $400, something like that. I'm going to close this up before... I'm always scared it's going to... It cut my thumb a few times. The first one that I customized. But you can see right here the beveled edges. Just gives it a lot more comfortable feel in hand. And then the bevels on the backspacer, you can see right there. And I did raise it just slightly. As you can see, it's just a little bit above the liners. I really like that look. I think it looks really good, and it gives the backspacer just a little bit of attention. Reverse grip is very comfortable. I'm going to use both hands to switch here because, again, I really don't want to drop this knife. But you get that down pressure, really comfortable section for the thumb when you do that reverse grip. As always, you guys, let me know down below what you guys think. And it is... I'm sweating like crazy in this shot, but I usually have the fans on maxed out. I have 2 fans in here, but if I have it on max, it's going to interfere with the mic. So that is the sacrifice I do for you guys, but really, really cool. Definitely need a Subvert in my collection. And this thing was fun. It was fun to do. There were some moments where things didn't really want to cooperate, but I had a fun time working on this. And again, shout out to Rex for sending this in to get it customized. So I hope you like it, Rex. Because if you don't, I'll take it. But as always, you guys, thank you for watching. I really appreciate the support. And as always, I will see you guys on the next one.